Hello and welcome to another Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. I received a package in the mail today and it came all the way from Canada. Now the guy that sent it to me, he wants me to fix it and return it to him. Now normally I wouldn't do this, but this is rather a special Matchbox car. It was sent to me by Steve Shepherd from Ontario in Canada, so thanks heaps for that, Steve. It is in fact a classic and one of the first series to come out. The first package contains a small die-cast reproduction driver that will sit in the driving seat. In the second package, here is the vehicle itself. It is a Matchbox number 19A MG Midget, and these were produced from 1955 to 1958. This is one of the smallest models I've ever worked on. It's only 51mm in length. As you can see, the paintwork is in poor condition. Somebody has actually painted the bonnet and the boot red, which was not standard colour. The wheels are pitted and rather scruffy looking, and the casting is not one of the best. I guess because this was an early model, they were still experimenting with the technique of getting fine details in the finished car. Some of the details on this model are barely visible with the naked eye. To remove the rust from the axles, I'm going to use some white vinegar. Many of my subscribers have suggested that if you soak the metal parts in white vinegar, then the rust will disappear overnight, so I'm going to give it a shot. If this works, then hopefully I shall be able to reuse the original axles. I'm going to leave the model submerged in the vinegar for 24 hours, then I'll come back and see what the axles look like. This is what I find when I come back to it a day later. I'm going to try agitating the rust to see whether it will come off the axles. I'm using a brush with medium stiffness. I must say that I do enjoy my work. At this point, it does not look like the white vinegar has done much at all. The front axle is relatively free of rust, but the rear one looks untouched. This is not looking good, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to replace these axles. I try scraping the rust with a knife blade. It starts to fall away, but it is not perfect. That is what we are trying to achieve here. As a second attempt, I try soaking it in some WD-40, which is a very light penetrant oil. Hopefully it will loosen up the wheels so I can get the axles off and maybe give them some extra cleaning. The wheels are absolutely seized on the axles. On this model, the wheels are metal. When two dissimilar metals come into contact with each other, they can experience intergalvanic corrosion. I think that this is what may have happened in this instance, and that is why the wheels are so difficult to remove from the axle. Finally the wheels come loose and I'm able to turn them with my fingers. Whilst freeing up the wheels, I accidentally snapped off the crimp end of the front axle. It looks like I'm going to have to replace the axles after all. The front axle was bent slightly, so I had to straighten it up to remove it from the model. This wheel is very stubborn and doesn't want to move, so I give it some more penetrant and a little bit more persuasion. Eventually it comes free. The rear axle is quite badly rusted, and I decide it can't be salvaged and cut it away from the model. I'm going to replace the axle by using the tails from these very thin pop rivets. I just put them in the vise and knock the pin down and the head of the rivet comes off. and you're left with the shank. It's a perfect match for these wheels. The size of the hubcap and the diameter of the shank look almost like the originals. I'm going to experiment for the first time in crimping the axle ends. Normally I form a flange with a drill press, but on this model and other early models, the axle ends were merely crimped at the factory in some way. So I'm now trying to replicate it using my vise. To get extra leverage, I am extending the lever on my vise by using a ring spanner like this. I've done this before. You can probably see that that lever on the vise is slightly bent as a result. That seems to work well and retains the wheel. Maybe I'll get a little bit closer next time so there's less play in the wheel. For the first time in how many years, this is rolling freely, so it's definitely a step in the right direction. For comparison, here's the new rivet I'm using on the left, and the one on the right is the rivet that I normally use for other models. So that's me cutting off the new one that I just experimented in making. Now I'm cutting off the rear one, as it's unsalvageable. Now I'm going to remove the driver with no head. Maybe he drove under a low bridge or something. He's very easy to remove, as he is just press fitted into a hole in the seat. We will be replacing him with the replica driver that came with the model. Have a look at the crud in there. It looks like he's been sitting in there for a very long time. And he's probably been eating too much takeaway by the look of it. Here's a comparison of the old and the new driver. Now it's time to paint strip. I'm holding the model with surgical forceps so that I don't get any paint stripper on my hands. This is a new tin, so hopefully it should give good results. Well, I was not disappointed. This paint is coming off in shreds. Using a pink toothbrush and a bath of water, I remove the loosened paint. Now I've got a nylon brush, fairly stiff bristled one. I'm just trying to run it over it to get rid of any little bits that are left behind. It doesn't seem to be working too well, so I shall use some dental picks instead. These come in very handy, and I recommend if you haven't got any and you're going to be doing this for a hobby, then you get some. This is a close-up look at the casting details, and they are very poor. The driver's side headlight is not the same size as the passenger side, which is a bit unusual, and just shows that the quality control wasn't as good as it was in those days. The windscreen's been bent back and I'm really scared I'm going to snap it off, but I'm just using some gentle movements and a little bit of wriggling to get it back so it's straight. I noticed that the top of the windscreen was heavily pitted, probably from a lot of play, and so are the running boards. I was tempted to use a file on these to rub them down, but then I thought maybe I would end up with an uneven finish. So instead I'm going to flat file them on a piece of emery paper that's placed down on a flat table. I finish off with some finer emery paper just to take any scoring out. To take the sharp edge off and make it look more like the original casting, I just run a fine piece of emery paper over the edges by hand. Now I'm attempting to remove as much oxidization as possible with wire wool. There's some imperfections in this casting, like air bubbles that were there when it was made. They're annoying me and they will be seen in the finished product, so I'm just dabbing a little bit of modeller's filler in there. Hopefully I'll sand them back and they will become invisible. There's another one there, just on the edge of the bonnet, and another couple of bits there. The front mudguards on both sides too were very badly chipped, so I also put a little bit of putty in those as well to try and smooth them out. Now that the putty has dried and has been sanded, it's time to undercoat the vehicle using a small rattle can of Tamiya fine primer. Remember in the beginning I said that the casting details on this model were very fine and almost invisible to the naked eye. While there's a real risk that they could disappear altogether if I put on too much primer and paint. So I'm very mindful of that, and I'm going to try and not overdo it. Time to address the wheels. Now, because these wheels are metal, I can feel free to dunk them in some paint stripper. There they go, so I'll leave those to soak for a little while. I'm just giving them a bit of a stir. After about 20 minutes, I take them out with tweezers to clean and inspect them. The paint on these wheels seems almost indestructible, and the paint stripper has not been very effective. So I'm going to instead just polish these with a little bit of emery and then touch them up with a grey wash, and hopefully they'll look a little bit better. But I guess they will never look brand new again. You can see they're quite pitted and been played with maybe in a sand pit over time. So here they are after I've given them a brief sand. To paint the wheels I'm using Tamiya flat paint number XF19. Now this is some Tamiya light grey that I'm putting on straight out of the pot. Hopefully it will fill some of the voids and disguise some of the irregularities on the wheels. Now I've got myself some tan coloured paint from Mr. Hobby. It's a water-based acrylic and it's number 27. The driver has some flashing down the centre of his body, but I'm leaving it on there because it looks more authentic as per the original models, which were quite rough when they came out the factory. For the main body of the vehicle I'm using Mr. Hobby 318 Radome, and for the interior seats I'm using Mr. Hobby number 467 Carmine Red. Here on the seat there's a pinhole in the casting that I didn't see before. So using a toothpick and a blob of paint, I'm just filling it up. Now I'm painting in some details on the front, the radiator grille and the headlights, using the silver ink from the ink pen. The lights were very difficult to paint because, as I said, they were different sizes, and I had to do them several times to make them look normal. Here's a good tip: buy a box of makeup pads. They come in really handy when you're cleaning your brushes. So it's finally time to put the wheels back on. So I've put a little washer there as a spacer just to give me a little bit of clearance when I clamp this thing up. There, now it looks a little bit ordinary, but I'm going to clean it up with a small file and a Dremel and make it look like the real McCoy. So I realise it's a little bit long, so I cut the tip off. After that, I file and sand until I'm happy with the look of the flattened end. Very awkward working with this scale model. It's extremely small and fiddly, and at this stage I don't want to stuff anything up. So 20 minutes later, and this is what the crimped axle ends turned out like, and I'm happy with that. Putting on the rear wheel, it really wasn't fitted that well, and I didn't want to risk bending the tabs anymore in case they snapped off. So I've just seated it back in the hole as best I could. Used a small dab of superglue gel to secure it into place. So here's the finished model. I'll just place it there and get my carousel, and then we will do the final reveal. Oh, what the hell? Ah, that got it. Ah, not again. So once again, this is what we started with. I reattached the guy's head, I filled in and filed out some holes, lumps and bumps. I undercoated, painted and top coated the body, spruced up the wheels, made new axles and painted the seats red and the grille and headlights silver. So what do we do when we get a new car? Well, we take it out for a spin. The weather's fine and this guy is going to pick up his girlfriend. They're going to put the roof down and drive around topless for the rest of the day, taking in all the sights and sounds of the Australian bush. I thank you for watching this episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers, and if you enjoyed it, please subscribe because there will be more to come. Goodbye. That's excellent, that's excellent. People are going to go, was that a redback I saw in the background? Don't pull it back up. As I just let it go. Actually, you can pull that out of the way. Oh, look at the filth in there. Yuck.
Marty!
What?
Have you seen my makeup wipes?
No?